Thank you, David. It's great to see everybody this afternoon. I'll be very brief. I know on an afternoon like this when the weather outside is absolutely perfect, it's a lot easier to be outdoors than it is indoors, but this is such a compelling and important topic that it draws us all. I think if we examine this question, it is truly one of the most significant questions facing all of us, everyone who lives in Greece today. And there are a couple other relevant questions that I certainly hope come out of this discussion this afternoon. And I think the first of these is, what will it take to create a sense of political stability here in Greece, given the current circumstances? And we know they are indeed very volatile. And the second one that I hope will come out also, that's very germane to our purpose here at ACT, is what can educational institutions like ACT do to promote a sense of stability? I think during a period of crisis like this one, educational institutions, especially ones that have a public service mission like ACT, have a very important role to play. And so the question is, what is that role and how can we live up to it? And what can we do in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, to foster greater stability? So I look forward to this discussion as a way of answering those types of questions. And I thank our speaker for taking time to join us today. Thank you.
I know a lot of you are completely fed up with politicians and with elections and with the negativity that we keep seeing again and again and again. We're here tonight to reclaim politics from the politicians and make it about citizens. So we're looking forward, as the name suggests, and we're looking for positive solutions.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. Very flattering words. I don't think I deserve half of those, but never mind. Now, I think we're all agreeing, and it is probably not a partisan view at all if I say that yesterday was a very sad day. It was the culmination of a week during which we're hoping against hope that something might come out of discussions to form a government, but not only to have a government, a stable government, as the President said, but also we were looking for evidence that the political parties, large or small, might have understood, might have been taught by the crisis, that politics is the art of the possible, and it is the art also of compromise. Unless you have, in a democracy, a party with an overwhelming majority, and that's always suspect, or a dictatorship, there's no way that you can get anywhere without some kind of compromise. It is not only it's impractical, but it's also undemocratic because you leave minorities out. Nevertheless, that has not turned into such a good result. And we're heading towards an election that I hope will not come back to bring us back to square one. Having said this, the thesis I'd like to support in this discussion is that whatever the outcome of the next election, with memorandum or without memorandum, in the euro or outside the euro, there are a number of things, deep structural changes that have to take place in this country, without which we're going to be back into square one in any way. And the memorandum may be demonized for all sorts of things, and admittedly there are weak points in the memorandum. Nevertheless, there is a substantial number of things that are listed as things to do that need to be done at all costs. Under all plausible scenarios, those changes are the same. And let me start by giving, if I may, a brief history of Greece from the end of the war till now, a very brief one. Not as if I were a historian, which I'm not, without the accuracy of a historian, but I was born in 1945, and from 1945 till now, these are the years that I'd like to account from my personal experience, and as I experienced it. The first period includes the Civil War and the period immediately after it, up to the government of Papavos. It was characterized by strife, like all wars are, but not just the wars, but also the purges that followed the war. It was also characterized by great instability, governments changing, governments not being able to be formed, and so on. On the political front, the left was demonized, laying the foundations for a highly polarized society like the one we have now. In economic terms, it's characterized by massive pouring of aid, notably the Marshall Plan in particular, over that period. Corruption is inevitable in periods like that. I would say that during that period, it's a guess, but it was probably not on a massive scale. It was restricted to the select few that could be corrupted, rather than the larger numbers that I will mention in a moment. The second period is the period between 1952 to 1963, where what we have is basically the consolidation of the right of Greek politics. Also, it's a consolidation of democracy in the cities, not throughout the country. In the rest of the country, outside the major urban centers like Salonika and Athens, and I think that puts paid to the total of the large urban centers, the situation is not very democratic. You have what was known at the time as the TER, who are basically making sure that political deviation in the countryside is not likely to survive. From the economic level, aid keeps pouring in, and it's a period of phenomenal growth. It's a period of phenomenal growth up to the point that Greece becomes rich enough no longer to qualify for aid. And then growth wanes a little bit, but nevertheless it's a period of phenomenal growth. Follows the third short-lived period between 63 and 67, where there is a reversal of the politics. The centre party takes over power, but the establishment in Greece does not allow that. And there is always a period of instability with growth, but alas, it leads to the Colonel's junta. The Colonel's junta is a period where there is, despite the myths that had been created after the junta, the resistance to the junta was minimal. And interestingly enough, the heroes of the resistance to the junta were not the working class, but was the elite of the bourgeoisie of this country. These were the ones that really resisted the junta. There's a lot of myth that was constructed afterwards. It was retrofitted over that period. Of course, a lot of resistance fighters were created afterwards and even got pensions for it. And then the fifth period is the period of the Metapolitevsi, or if you like, the restoration of democracy after that. Little is known about some aspects of the junta period for one good reason, which was that in order to heal wounds, not much was investigated. A lot of silence went over it. There was a small period until the rise of the Pasok government, where there was a fair stability, and basically it was a period of healing wounds. Some brave attempts towards reconciliation were carried out, like the legalization of the Communist Party, like changes in the language and so on. And most importantly, the addition of Greece to the European community, as it was then rather than the European Union, or common market. Now, the most famous or infamous, the most talked about period is the one that followed that. It's the period of, after Andreas Papandreou took over. Now, I'm reminded of a cartoon. My favorite cartoonist ever is a Spanish cartoonist called Chumi Chumez. He worked including periods where, what's his name was in power, the Spanish socialist premier, roughly at the same time as Papandreou. And I love the cartoon, which characterizes both the Spanish and the Greek society at the time. was a huge crowd on demonstration with a big poster, and on the poster said, "Equal rights to corruption." I think that characterizes the situation amply. This is where corruption becomes a democratic right. And I think there are good reasons for that. It is wrong to demonize that period, because that period had many good things as well as many bad things. For one thing, real democratization did take place, which did not exist previously, except on paper. So liberalism was able to flourish, even though it did not govern. On the other hand, excesses and advantage was taken of that. Vast amounts of money were pouring into the economy. Great misuse of those, whether it was in public works or whether it was in what I said, the democratization of corruption. And a very worrying thing about that period, and we're paying the price of it still, is that although the good thing was that the demonization of the left was abolished, or was defeated, if you like, the demonization of profit took its place. To make a profit became a bad thing. Entrepreneurship along with that. Statism took its place. So what we had was a contradiction. Basically a capitalist economy with an anti-capitalist orientation. It's a contradiction, and I think it's the beginning of a schizophrenia in Greek, not only in the Greek economy, but also in the Greek society. And going hand in hand with that, has been clientelism. The exchange of one party after the other. Now I'm talking about PASOK. This is not just the fault of PASOK, this is the fault of both major parties. Where they both were getting into power, were so paramount, and the interests of the country became so irrelevant that at every election, the spending skyrocketed. The civil service was inflated, bloated, I would say, in order to accommodate our kids. Where our kids are the kids of anyone, the Yamas, as they say, of when anyone party in power. The ability to print money and the inflows from the EU structural funds made that possible. But of course, this is money that either has to be invested in order to produce results soon, and that did not happen, or printed money is inflationary. And attitudes change. It's no longer what you do, who you know. And if you are a Volomenos, there is a huge resistance to change. I think the English term, and British English term is, "I'm all right, Jack. So I don't care about what happens to you, I'm fine." And what happens is that tribalism replaces common sense in politics, where the tribe is the political party in this case. And this is the schizophrenia I'm talking about. By a generation that was not the generation that fought in the Second World War, or the resistance, or what the generation that was oppressed. It was rather a generation that was rather spoiled, well taken care of by its parents, and so on. And it also became, Greece started finding a new identity. And the new identity was characterized by the split between East and West. As Rudyard Kipling said, "Oh, East is East and West is West, and in Greece the twain shall meet." And in fact, in Greece they met, and that was the schizophrenia that underlined the Greek psyche at that time. I'll come back to that in a moment when I analyze the current situation. And extreme nationalism that developed within that and comes out of that mentality also has taken a left-wing manner. It's is one of the paradoxes, and part of that schizophrenia. For example, when the issue of the name of Macedonia came about regarding our nameless or unnameable country to the north of Greece, both right wing and left wing joined forces in agreeing that that should not be the case. Interesting. Then we come to a brief period of hope, which did not materialize. That was the period between 1996, and Semitis taking over, with a period of a real effort to tidy up the house, which worked until Greece joined the Euro, and included a period of austerity that was as nothing compared to the austerity that Greece is undergoing now. But the reaction was such that immediately after Greece joined the Euro, the pressure was huge for relief. And that, combined with the availability of very cheap money, caused all sorts of problems for which we are still paying. The Olympic Games was a hope that it was a big investment that would pay off. It cost a lot of money, and it paid off nothing, basically. And I think that when we come to the next period, the period between 2004, just after the Olympics, and the declaration of the crisis, I have to confess that this is a period I do not understand. I cannot explain. It's a huge mystery to me. Nothing was done of the way I see it, it was a period of sloth. It was a period of nothing happening. The problems were accumulating, and people just were gazing their belly buttons. Nothing of any substance was taking place until the bubble burst in 2000. I can't comment on that period because I have to confess that to me it's unexplainable. And now the Jamboree is over. It's finished. And what do we see as a result of all that? Well, we see the production base is all but destroyed. Greece, the problem with Greece is not the debt so as much as it is the fact that Greece no longer produces it. The state is over-bloated and dysfunctional. And that's not the fault of many heroic civil servants to whom we owe a debt of gratitude for some of them, working very hard to make the thing work at all. It's amazing that it works at all rather than otherwise. But worst of all is there is a youth, much of it out of work, mostly skillful, but mostly also with skills that mostly don't match with what the economy needs to make it stand on its feet again. Some of the attitudes that contribute to the crisis persist. Others, such as the dream for a secure job for life in the civil service, are died, if they haven't died, they've died a slow death. What has not died at all, and it's the stance of Greece vis-à-vis the rest of the world. That remains just as schizophrenic as it was. The current debate shows that, as Kipling said again, East is East and West is West, and in Greece the trade shall meet. And East shall not know what West is doing, and vice versa within that same thought. And one of the legacies of the eastern part of that influence is a view of time that is peculiar. Time is timeless in Greece. Tomorrow, Echetheos, God will provide. The absence of coherent plan of any kind is because Avril Echetheos, God will provide. I mean, if we look at the debacle of yesterday and the weekend, and if we look at the incomprehensible position of Syriza, I would argue that Syriza just didn't have a plan. I mean, it's a plausible explanation. It's not. I don't have an answer, but Syriza probably didn't have a plan. They didn't know what to do. So rather than take the risk of entering something which they wouldn't be able to manage, they thought, well, let's wait until the hour tomorrow, and let's prepare for tomorrow now, for the day after. But this is not just Syriza. Lack of planning is an inherent problem in Greek politics. But it's not only, that's not only the thing inherited from Greece. There are some things that have good sides and bad sides. The family. The family, for example, is very strong in Greece. And that's a good thing because at times of need, it supports the children. And in a crisis like that, if it weren't for family bonds, the situation would be much worse. At the same time, arguably, the existence of such bonds gives an alibi to the state and to the powers that be not to take care of a very large number of things. The state does not provide. I mean, innumerable times I've been told stories by people going to a hospital, taking a relative to the hospital, being told by the hospital authorities, "Will you go now and find blood for your relative?" I mean, this is surrealistic. To be the honors of the family, you have to find blood at the very last moment, as a matter of life and death. But that's how it is. So we have a situation where effectively the clan is above the tribe, and that is a problem. And that also means that one can accuse the state of being absent. I remember with my partner a winter in Athens where it was snowing, and half an hour into the snow, that was in 2001, we will see on television people saying, "Where is Simitis?" I was expecting Simitis to come with a shovel to remove the snow, so that, but people would expect that. At the same time, when they have to pay their taxes, or to have to cheat by not issuing a receipt, or this, that, and the other, that's all right, because the state does not belong to anyone. It's not our state, it is a state that belongs, which is somewhere in space. And there is also the issue of timelessness. God will provide tomorrow. And if God doesn't provide, it's their fault. It's their fault. The third person plural with a capital T. And who they are, it's a variation. It can be the capitalists, the imperialists, the Masons, the Jews. Now it's the immigrants. The fashion changes. So what's to be done? Greece must reconstruct. I'm conscious that I'm running out of time, so I'll speed up a bit by way. Greece must reconstruct its production base. As long as it consumes substantially more than it produces, there's not going to be an end to its struggles. Austerity measures have brought consumption down, but they've also brought production down as well. So that's not a solution. Money to stimulate demand is a fallacy, it's a pipe dream. Money to stimulate demand and engage in politics are fine when you're in a big country, where you, at a time when you can impose tariffs, and in a country which does not produce, all it does is encourages imports, and imports worsen the situation. And the question is, I remember discussing with a friend of mine in Brussels over lunch, and the secretary was the director of the commission, and the secretary comes in all of a sudden and says, "Mr. Hardy, you have to sign this, it's very urgent." And he goes, "Yes, it's very urgent, I can see that. Is it important?" And there's a big difference between the urgent and the important, and that very often the difference between the urgent and the important is lost over here. So we will. I can see obstacles to that, to treating the important matters, which is not to be competitiveness. In other words, to be able to produce more and sell what you produce. The administration of the state is a major problem. Bureaucracy needs to be simplified. Part of the administration of the state also includes continuity. You can't have everything changed just because the government changed. Greece suffers from acute discontinuity. The judicial system. Investors need legal certainty. They can't invest in a situation where the law may change tomorrow and completely reverse what they were planning. The judicial system must be able to operate with speed, and controls must be able to be put in place. Checks and balances are essential, not only for the economy but for democracy as well. Education and training. There are shortcomings with education. Lifelong learning is a dirty word. If you had, in a state university, if you had a course on entrepreneurship, walking into people, I can imagine people walking into the course as if they would into a sex shop, making sure that nobody saw them walk in, and making sure that nobody sees them walk out. The research and development. There is hardly a relationship between what the economy needs and what the universities research. And better international relations. For example, a lot depends on our relation for selling. So not only to produce but also to sell. I'm not sure that, with the exception of one period where Dora Bakoyanni made an attempt in that direction, that Greek embassies are doing enough to sell Greek products. I would say that as far as the fiscal issues are concerned, they are secondary, they are urgent, but it's the structural changes that are important. The problem with and the main problem to be addressed in implementing those is the potential, is the social strife that may result from the former. The structural changes need little or no money, most of the structural changes. But the problem is that they are long-term, and the long-term is hidden by the urgent. I'll just finish by stating on that point an example of what Napoleon said when he asked his ministers to prepare the first civil code, which is a new civil code for France, which was the model of the civil code in most European countries. When he explained to them what he wanted, his minister said, "But sire, this is going to take at least 10 years. So Sire said, "Well, I'm glad you realize how urgent it is to start immediately." I'd like to make a few comments. My comments are not really of the essence. Some of them are really questions for further thinking, if anybody wants to think about those things further. I'll do them by group, although sometimes I may be jumping from one to the other if there are common elements. Let's start with the first group, or the democracy group. And I found that very interesting. Basically, yes, I also share the view that in a democracy, all voices should be allowed. And of course, one must distinguish between the right of speech and the right of expression and the right to act. And in that sense, when it comes to the right to act, not all anti-democracy parties are the same. I also agree with that. I think, however, the distinction should be made a little clearer. I mean, a party which is anti-democratic, but it's anti-democratic in that it respects a different form of government, or a different form of, but it says nothing against race, creed, or gender. Does not put anybody's life in danger. A party that says that immigrants or gypsies or women or whatever are different from the rest of us, that is a dangerous party, and action by that, in my view, should be severely restricted. And I think the findings of the group are along the same lines. Now, there is the question that was raised about about whether capitalism and democracy are compatible. Now, there is an economist whose name keeps escaping me, but I've written it down so that I won't forget it.
Was it Danny something?
Yeah, Danny, what's it? Well, never mind. An economist, anyway. We said something which I think is very important. We said that out of the following three things, democracy, states, and the global economy, you can only have two. You can't have all three. So you can choose your couple, your pair, but you can only have two. Einstein has a solution for that, which arose out of the nuclear debate rather than the global markets issue, and that is to have global government. And when told on the nuclear debate that that's not the practical future for mankind, global government, Einstein said, well, then the only practical future I can see for mankind is the destruction of mankind, was his answer. Now, global markets are not a nuclear cannot be compared to a nuclear holocaust, but you have to bear in mind one thing, and that is very important to bear in mind when we talk about patriotism, when we talk about buy Greek or buy Serb or buy French and so on. The population of the world is something close to 10 billion people, or soon will be, it isn't. There is no way you can feed 10 billion people with national barriers. Absolutely no way you can do that. The only thing that is worse than the globalization of markets is the collapse of globalization. So there is some food for thought regarding that dimension, and it's also a dimension that applies in some of the other points made elsewhere. In other words, patriotism in one way or another has its limits, because if everybody does it, then we're all in trouble. Adolf Hitler was allowed to do it, to break the rules of the economy using barter, because he was the only one to do it. But you know where it led. On the second group, which was the one on education, I thought the debate we already had by everybody shows how interesting it has been and how interesting issues were addressed in an excellent manner, I think. I still have, there are things that I agree entirely with, and in fact, even from a personal viewpoint. For example, personally, I'm a member of the British Institute of, Royal Institute of British Architects, because I'm an architect. I'm also a member of the British Computer Society, because I'm a computer scientist. So yes, you can make unorthodox combinations, and you can discover, not at random, just because you happen to like this one, you happen to like the other one. Because there is, very often, you can discover a relationship between the two that others haven't discovered. And that, to my mind, is a very valuable thing. One thing that I didn't hear in this debate, and in fact, it is, I think that the position taken was also reflects some of the troubles of the Greek higher education system, is the relationship between education and vocation. Vocation. The point is that yes, everybody wants to have an education that creates better human beings. I would argue that that is essential when it comes to high school. Right now, unfortunately, this is not even the case in high school, because high school is devoted to vocation, in other words, preparing for university, which will prepare you for a job. On the other hand, you get to university, and then vocation is put aside. And nobody cares about vocation anymore. So we have a contradictory situation. And this is something to reflect about what the relationship between education and vocation should be. If high school is a good educational system for creating better human beings, and if the interface between high school and university were different, then I think we can talk about university or any other vocational training for that matter. Then we can argue for a different kind of university. And I have a question, for example, over there about research, which is covered in the next aspect. When it comes to research, again, with Greek universities, it's completely divorced from production. And again, it also comes from competitiveness. I didn't hear anything about how technological companies, new technological companies could emerge. I heard some things about encouragement by government. That is, in my view, not sufficient. It is again a question of attitudes, but it's also a question of orientation of the universities. Unfortunately, we have a situation where the state universities have refused to implement a law that at last went in the right direction. It didn't go all the way, it went in the right direction, it was voted by 85% of the Greek parliament, and the university chose to ignore it, and not deliberately not implement it. Mr. Tsipras promised the rectors that he's going to scrap that law. because it was voted by 85% of another one. I wonder whether were both Greek parliaments or not. I'm not sure. On the question of competitiveness, I already mentioned the issue of buy Greek or buy whatever vis-à-vis the global markets issue, and I would argue, but stand to be corrected or to hear different views, that this issue should be addressed at its root rather than by encouragement. I don't think that you can create encourage. I don't think patriotism is an answer to that. For example, patriotism was mentioned for the patriotism was mentioned in particular for the creation of new companies and also for paying your taxes and so on, for anti-corruption and so on. Well, that's wishful thinking. In practice, you will pay your taxes once it's demonstrable that by paying your taxes you're doing yourself a favor, and that by not paying your taxes you're not. If we're talking about changes in mentality, I think that one essential thing is to say that, to understand that if you don't pay your taxes, then chances are that nobody else will either. And if nobody pays their taxes, you're in deep excrement. And in such deep excrement, I think Greece lies right at the moment. For that, amongst other reasons. Finally, regarding public administration, I think what we heard is a very good account of many of the things that are needed. I want to stress one of the things that is very close to both the European Union and to the United States. The European parlance for it is called subsidiarity. The European word for it. It's a bureaucratic word, but it means exactly something very precise. And it's completely absent in Greece. And that is that if you have various levels of government, you should never do something at a higher level that is best done at the level below that. So the idea that you have a decision that goes from local to intermediate to central government in order to feed back is absurd. If it should be done at the local level, everything must be vested in the local level. You can take that to a larger or narrower extent. For example, if you take the question of education, which was discussed, if you take Germany, the Länder have entire authority over education, and indeed you have an educational system in North Rhine-Westphalia which is very different from the educational system in Berlin. But that's a local decision, because it has been decided that that is a local issue. And to have, right now, what happens is that we had a simplification ostensibly through Kallikratis, and that is just adding another layer. It has not really provided a real simplification. It reminds me of a reaction I had once at the European Commission, where somebody said, we're going to simplify. And somebody said, oh, we're going to simplify. I said, don't hold your breath. We're going to do exactly what we were doing previously. We're just going to add a layer of simplification on top of it. So very often this is exactly what, and this is exactly what happened in the end. So just I think that what you have produced in the four groups shows an excellent awareness of the problems and also sensitivity to the solutions that are needed. I only hope that I might have given you some food for further thought, because the other things you already had it in you. And I also want to, because now we're going to open for questions if there is time, but I want to say, just final words that I would say would be to say, I want to wish you something. I don't know what to wish. And I'm 67 years old, and as I said, because as I said, I was born in 1945. That makes me in the cohort that has been the luckiest in the history of mankind. and I'm not exaggerating. I was born in 1945, before the World War II finished in Europe, but after it was finished in Greece. And for the last 67 years, I haven't seen a war, I haven't seen famine, and I haven't seen pestilence. How many generations can say that? I don't think there has been any in the history of mankind. We have, for a whole 67 years, have not experienced that. And I want to wish you the same.
Thank you very much.